Abram walked around looking at the walls and the old planks of wooden floors. The crown molding was starting to crack in the living room. The seventh stair creaked close to the banister just like it did when he was a little boy. The sound was reassuring, almost soothing. He walked down the hall to what used to be his bedroom. The door was open, so he walked in and closed it behind. He kept his eyes open to let them get used to the dark. Sitting Indian style on the floor, a strange glow lit up on his left side. His eyes followed it up to where it came from, shaped like a perfect, beautiful white keyhole. He got up to his knees and scooted across the floor to what he thought was a door. When Abram looked through it, the little boy was there. Jabez smiled with his arms reaching out. He was laughing, but there wasn't any sound. Abram's fingers fumbled into the pocket of his jeans and grabbed the key he made special for this moment. He backed up and slid the key into the hole. It fit perfectly, and he could feel the gears turning like his own body was making the move. The door opened. Abram stood in the center of an all-white room. There was nothing there at all. No walls, no ceiling, no floor, no Jabez. He turned around in circles and couldn't tell when he'd made it all the way around. Everything was white. All the air was sucked away, and every sound was silenced. Feeling numb, afraid and alone, he tried to scream. Paper. Pages and pages of brown paper flushed out of his mouth. Hundreds of them. He couldn't breathe. He choked and gagged. It hurt worse than any pain he experienced before. The edges of his mouth were bleeding. His entire body was screaming. He thought he was going to pass out. It just kept coming. His eyes felt like they were going to pop out of their sockets. The pressure pushed so hard the skin was stretching. When it finally ended, he collapsed on the floor. Paper lay scattered all around. His lungs were heaving to suck in as much air as they could take. He rubbed at his eyes and pushed at them with the heels of his palms to make sure they were still inside his head. Then Jabez was standing right in front of him. Jabez's chin pressed deep into his chest, looking down at the pages twirling around his feet. Abram could only see the top of his head, but could tell his mouth was open. All of a sudden, Jabez breathed in and the pages rushed together in front of Abram into a neat stack. Jabez went down on one knee and put his palm up on top of the pile. His skin began to wrinkle. He was shrinking without getting smaller. Slowly, the pages sucked him in. He hollowed, and it looked like every bit of him inside the skin went into the paper. Abram could see the words appearing from nowhere on the stacked sheets. The more words that showed up, the less of Jabez remained in his skin. Though the pages were stacked several hundred deep, Abram could see the words filling every single one of them. Words, words, words kept coming. Some of the pages became so full they were almost completely black, letters overlapping and taking up space whether they were legible or not. Then it stopped. The stack remained still and silent. A few pieces of paper twisted with their corners sticking out, appearing brown and old, splotched with mold around the edges or covered in a film of mildew. The other pile was on the floor next to Abram's feet. He could still feel Jabez there, and that kind of feeling you get when you turn to see if someone's standing behind you, but nobody's there. The only thing left of him was a pile of wrinkled skin, empty with one hand still resting on the top of the stacked pages. He couldn't see it at first, but the skin was moving. The torso slid along the floor, inching forward. Flesh wrapped itself over paper. First, the stomach slid underneath the bottom of the stack. Then legs and arms covered the spine, and his head made the cover. When it was finished, the book took a deep breath and exhaled out through the pages. It smelled old, rotted. Abram was back in his old bedroom, sitting on the floor with the book on his lap. He could feel the slow rhythm of its heart beating and watched the cover rise and fall beneath his palm. He stood up, put the book under his arm, opened the door, walked down the stairs, and left the house. Abram walked for miles, carrying the book under his arm through the city. People he passed stepped in wide circles around him. This man did not appear outwardly threatening. In fact, he looked terribly alone and sad. A cloud of dread floated in the air around him, affecting everyone who came near. Children playing on the sidewalk ran back to their homes, crying for no discernible reason. Dogs romping free in backyards whimpered tails down and crawled back in through dog doors or beneath bushes to hide. Drivers' vision blurred, mistaking red lights for green. Motorcycles fell to their sides, ripping through leather, denim, and fragile skin along rough pavement. Buses drove past their stops and through pedestrian-filled crosswalks. More accidents were reported on that day than any other in recent memory along the route Abram walked. Abram stepped rhythmically, oblivious to the goings-on around him. He went to his apartment, put the book down on the floor in the middle of the single small room, and didn't leave for days. He stared at it. He touched it. He smelled it. He rested his ear against the cover. He listened. He didn't eat or sleep. He couldn't break away from this thing. It became everything. It started to become Abram himself. Abram woke one morning with his cheek pressed firmly into the book's cover, drooling out of the corner of his cracked lips. He realized he needed to get rid of it. He went to the dresser and pulled out an old red ribbon that his mother used to tie her hair with. He tightly wrapped it around the book and tied it. He made a bow and then made a knot with the loops. He took the last bus running that night, as far away from the city as it would take him before it turned back. He walked for miles. The new construction made houses that all looked the same. Trees lay in the street, uprooted to make way for this suburban utopia. He found one very old tree still standing by the side of a freshly poured foundation and started digging at the ground covering the roots. He didn't have a shovel, so he used the heels of his shoes. When the rubber wore down, he used his hands until his fingers bled. A few nails chipped away, but he kept on going. He was so thirsty that his tongue and lips cracked. He couldn't feel his fingers anymore. He stopped and threw his brother into the hole and covered him up with dirt. When he was finished, he jumped on the spot to push it down some more and screamed at the top of his lungs. He roared to the leaves in the tree and the black of the night sky. He tried to hitch a ride back home, but couldn't blame anyone for passing by the way he looked. He didn't get home until sunset the next day. He turned on the shower and fell into the corner with all his clothes on and cried. The hot water didn't last long, so by the time the landlord let herself in to find out why the neighbors below were complaining about their leaky ceiling, Abram was all pruned up, sitting in the corner under the falling water, shivering. She called the hospital, and they held him there for 3 months until he was able to speak again. By the time they released him, it was all a dream.